Okay, so when you first start up Rhino, you should be prompted with a startup template. Basically what this is saying is what scale are you drawing this as, right? Like, so you kind of already have to know what you're building to start off with before you get into this software, because you could pick a large object, and if you read down here it says use this template for building objects or sizes of trucks, larger than a truck or larger than a building. And if small objects, this is also saying the same thing. And so we're pretty much going to be working in the small objects in inches. And this is basically saying use this template file for stuff that is smaller than a truck. It's kind of like, oh, okay, I'm building this tiny piece of furniture. I'm not going to use large objects and feet because we're probably going to be highly precisioned, and we're going to want to, tolerances to 0.001 of an inch, right? If you were to go fabricate this thing, they're going to want to know that much precision, whereas in the larger objects, that precision is not necessary. So we're going to always be working in inches, small objects, and so let's go ahead and open that up. And it's nice that this asks you every time. You can also change this in your options as well, but we're going to go ahead and open that. So you probably have these 4 views up, but not the layering or the properties. Is that true? Yeah? Okay. What was that?
It just automatically shows up on version 5.
It's got tabs.
Oh, it does. That's great. That's really great. I want to see. I'm going to pause. So, when you open up Rhino, you have your 4 viewports here. Top, front, right, and perspective. As you can see, it gives you this grid to start with. And it's the same size grid in all of the views. And so if you can imagine, this is the front, right, of whatever object you're creating. This is the top view of whatever object you're creating. This is the right view, and then this is a perspective view of it, right? So the toolbar is basically this menu bar up here. Yeah, this is the main kind of menu toolbar. There's 4 curves, surfaces, solids, and meshes. Those are kind of the 4 drawing tools that you have in Rhino. You can think of curves as being very basic and meshes as being very complex. And so curves are not only like a curve, they're also straight lines. So when you pull down these menus, you have a variety of tools that you can use to create each one of these. Typically, you'll be drawing curves, right? Whatever shape you need to make, and then you'll be utilizing a loft command or a sweep command or a revolve command, to make it into a surface. So you can take a line and make it into a surface, and then you can make a surface into a solid, and then you can go from a surface to a mesh, or a solid to a mesh. So it's kind of like you start out with the basic curve and you just keep building upon that. that makes some sense. And then you have, you know, your dimensions, a dimension toolbar that allows you to dimension objects out. And then the transform bar is your move, copy, rotate, you know, rotate in 3D, scale. You can scale 1D, 2D, or 3D. We'll look at the difference between those three at some point in the next 2 weeks, but this is just kind of a general overview of this software. So probably not going to get too much into the toolbars except object snaps, but a lot of this stuff in this toolbar can be found on your sidebars here. So for instance, curve, like a single line, I believe is this button here, and that's a single line as opposed to a larger line. So like all these pull down menus have a quick tool here, and it's just a matter of kind of figuring out which one is which. And I don't particularly use these buttons much, but it's very similar to AutoCAD. If anybody's looked at the classic AutoCAD, if they've ever used it before they got the ribbon, it's very similar to AutoCAD in a sense that you have a command line here. This is the command line, and this is similar to the ribbon, except it's not as easy and intuitive to understand. But they're basically quick keys to getting to particular drawing tools. Obviously, this one, you know, it's a quick key to getting to opening up a new project, opening up an existing project, saving a project, printing a project, copying, pasting, tools. Over here, there's, you know, creating different types of lights. So this is where we get into when you want to start to render something and you want certain type of light to hit your object. You know, you can start to create different types of lights. This is kind of the render toolbar. If I'm basically holding down the button, the left mouse button, to kind of get these boxes to pop up. But if you hover over these, some of them have they have two options on them. So if you click on the right button, it'll do something different than the right or the left button. So you kind of want to be aware of that as you're looking at these tools. Sidebars, layouts, modeling aids, toolbars. Let's jump into, so you guys have these toolbars already, or these windows already open. The layers are similar to AutoCAD layers, where you can rename them. You can hide the layer or not hide the layer. You can change the color of the layer, and then it also has an option to add a material to the layer. So I'm pretty sure if you scroll this thing out, you know, there's line types, so you can change the line type. So if you're, you know, doing a floor plan and you want to show a center line of an object, you know, you can start to change the line type of the line itself. If you have an object selected and you left click on a layer, you can put that object on a specific layer. That helps with really in workflow of the software. So if you create an object that has 5 or 6 different parts that kind of all come together, it's nice to put the different parts on different layers so you can turn them on and off and So it's easier to keep modeling. So if you make something and then it's in the way of something else that you're trying to model, you can always hide that object to start modeling something else. And so layers are pretty important as far as that goes. And then especially for materials, each material can only have, or each layer can only have one material. So if you have multiple components making this one particular object and you need to assign different materials to them, you'll have to put each individual piece or component on a separate layer to apply a different material. And maybe the material, you know, is applied to two components, but one, the material's not sitting right. So you may want to, you know, take those two objects and put them on two separate layers so that you can manipulate the material to make it look right on the object itself. So it's nice to understand kind of what the layers can do for you. It's kind of a general overview of layers. You can also create a new layer, and then this check button, if you double click on any one of these, that check button is basically saying that's the layer that I'm drawing on at a particular moment. So if you set these up beforehand and you want to draw on a specific layer, that's how you change your layer to be drawing on that layer. I typically like to have one as like my line work, one as my solid surfaces, one as, you know, my mesh surfaces, one as surface, you know, to start out with. And then once I create an object, then I would start to define more layers in order to apply materials to different stuff. That makes some sense. I don't know, it might. Okie dokie. So if we go to File and Properties, this document properties comes up. This is a pretty powerful window right here. We'll get into more detail about how to set up your renders, but in order to set up pretty much everything in your file, the document properties is where you want to go. So, for instance, if we want to change our units, we go down to units here, and you can change your units. You can change your tolerances for your units, and you can change your distance displays from decimals to fractional feet to feet and inches. And the precision on the screen, you know, you can start to get down to, what is that, like 6 zeros, which is ridiculous. You'll probably never use it, but it's good to understand how you can do that. So right now it's kind of defaulting to 3 zeros. That's pretty darn, that tolerance is like.
If you change it to feet and inches, doesn't it change the display? Today, because they changed it to 37.
Yeah. So.
They probably understand it better as an engineer, architect.
Yeah, but this is more like an engineer software. I mean, it's really like if you're making a part and you need it to be like within a thousandth of an inch, right? Anyways, if you change your feet and inches, you can start to precision down to a 16th or a 32nd or a 64th. It's the same thing, right, as going to decimals and saying, you know, I want, what is that, probably like a 64th of an inch or something like that, something ridiculous in decimals. So, I'm not a math major. I don't know. So, I actually don't know what the difference between units and page units are. I'll have to look that up. But again, you can start to change your tolerances here. The grid itself, so this grid, if you want a specific grid, so if you want to set your grid snaps, right, to being, you know, a quarter of an inch or a half of an inch or 5 feet, this is where you can change your grid size, and then your snaps itself will snap to those grid points. So this basically is a 50 by 50 inch grid, and the grid lines are, I'm sorry, it's a 50 by 50 inch grid between this green and red work plane here. So similar to, it has kind of the feel of SketchUp a bit, you know, when you start to look at it in that respect. They give you that green and red line of work planes, right? I don't use SketchUp either. You know about SketchUp. You know about all the softwares. Look at you. So basically, yeah, this is one 50 by 50 grid, and then and so these grid points, these mirror grid lines, every 0.25 of an inch mirror it along this 50 by 50, and then I believe if you start to change mirror grid lines, no, maybe not. Where are my properties here?
This is
Major lines. Yeah, good call. I was looking at mirror grid line. Minor grid lines and major grid lines. I probably need some glasses. At any rate, this is where you can go ahead and change your grid snapping and your grid lines and that good stuff all in there. Modeling aids are pretty important here. So, the nudge is really important, and you'll find out later on when you model that it's the nudge is fairly powerful. But you probably have Alt plus arrow keys selected. Go ahead and select just the arrow key. It makes it a little easier and less counterintuitive, or more counterintuitive, to just use the arrow keys to nudge things versus having to click the Alt and the nudge to do that. Takes it from 2 hands to 1 hand operation. Nudging steps, you can define how far each nudge occurs. So it defaults to 0.2 of an inch as the standard, and then the control plus the nudge, which is just control and arrow, does 0.05 of an inch, and the shift does 2 inches. So you can change those to whatever standard you kind of like. It might change depending on what you're modeling. So it's a good thing to know. Smart Track. Smart Track is it's kind of hard to show without modeling something, but if you had a line, a perpendicular, horizontal line, and you had another one that went through it, you can start to smart track a specific point and then follow it along that line. And so it's kind of hard to describe without actually modeling something, but you'll understand once we start modeling how that works. So you can choose to enable Smart Track or not. Could probably just go ahead and enable it. And enable course tooltips. Let's just not actually do either one of those at the moment and just click OK. The nudge is really the one that you want to change to arrows and keys. There's a lot of other stuff in here. Again, it's very powerful. Properties tab for the entire project, so you might just want to kind of review that. You could also, jump online and Google, Rhino properties, document properties, and probably watch like an hour-long tutorial on YouTube about it. But we're really not going to get into too much of this. But line types, if you wanted to create an additional line type, that's where you would do it under line types. The views, Spaceball is actually something that I don't know about yet. I'm going to learn that in the next couple of days to teach you guys about that. It's a lot of stuff in here, but the basics are the render settings, the units, and the modeling aids. Those are really the three that you're going to want to know how to use and utilize for this course. So, your command line, if it's not at the top of the screen and it's at the bottom of the screen, it really depends on your user preference. You can drag it and move it down to the bottom of your screen if you want, or leave it at the top of the screen. So you can pull these toolbars around a bit and put them wherever you're most comfortable utilizing them, so they are movable. I like to just kind of keep this fairly narrow so that my workspace is nice and neat. I'm going to put this back over here. This is your, I feel like something disappeared here, but it just came down to here. So these are your turning on snap, or on snap here. If I click this off, notice this toolbar goes away. This toolbar is your on snap options, so similar in AutoCAD where you hover over something and it detects an end point or a midpoint or a center point, an intersection. Near is useful sometimes, but other times it'll grab something that you don't want to start with as a precision point. So typically you can turn these on and off as you need them, and you can quickly disable them all together with the disable button right here. And then this S track is the smart track that I was talking about. You can disable it or enable it right here as well. Ortho, if you select that, you'll pretty much only be able to draw in the horizontal and vertical planes. It'll want to stay perpendicular or horizontal or vertical, depending on what you're doing. If you're drawing in perspective, it's probably not good to have that turned on, but maybe if you want a straight line, in the top, front, or right view, you'd want that on. So these are all kind of tools that you'll be utilizing as you're drawing, depending on what you're doing. We have about 10 minutes left. Making it to the end. 8? Yes?
We don't have those on the new version, so just the checkboxes at the bottom.
You just have these?
Yeah, we have like more than that. It's just a little bit different.
Okay, pull that.
I'm recording again. These are the 4 viewports that you have, and if you click on, right click on each one of these, you have a bunch of options. You can change your wireframe to shaded, to rendered, to ghosted, X-ray, flat shaded. So these are all kind of tools that help you visualize what you're doing. Line work, like when you change from wireframe to rendered or shaded, the line work that you create goes away, and so it only shows solid and surfaces. So be careful about that. Typically work in wireframe for the top, front, and right. And then in perspective, is a good one to click and show it rendered, which will just kind of do like a gray, overall grade object. But again, if you need your perspective view to see your wireframe, your line work, you want to switch it back to wireframe. If you double click on one of them, it opens up the full screen of that view. Maybe your tabs do that too at the bottom. You can kind of play with that and see what that does. If you double click on it again, it brings you back to the 4 viewports. If you're drawing in, say, the top view, let's just start to draw a line here. I just clicked this line button once. If you notice, it's kind of drawing it in all 4 views. You can see it. If I switch to another view, meaning just hover the mouse to another view, you basically are activating that viewport, and you can draw in that viewport. So you want to be careful when you're drawing, because you can start to draw lines in very strange angles that you don't want to actually be drawing in. So you have to be careful about this. But it's good in a sense that, if you're working on an object and you're not quite getting the right view that you want to select another point in space, you can jump to your 3D to kind of utilize, drawing something in another viewport. If you hold the shift key down, it kind of locks it. So I'm in the top view, and you'll notice that in the right, in the front view, all we see is a dot because we're drawing that line in a view. Basically, in the front view, you can't see that, right? Because it's just a straight line. And so as you're looking at it in the front view, it's just a point in space, right? So similar to the right view, we're looking at this now. So that if we're thinking about this between the top and the right view, we're looking at the top. As we're drawing in the right view, we're looking at the top view from the right side, right? And as we're looking in the front view, we're looking at it straight on, and so we're only still seeing that dot in the front view, even though So as I draw down in the top view, I'm really drawing left in the right view, from right to left in the right view. So if you think about it as like a cube, right? And you're like the top of the cube, you're looking at the object from the top. And then you look at it from the right side or straight on, or the perspective starts to look at it from all three views, more or less. Does that make some sense? Am I not explaining anything very well?
Just use the X, Y, Z axis. It's just like three-dimensional math.
Yeah. Okay. So
That's the best way to follow.
again, yeah, so you've got your X, Y, and Z axis. It's the same concept, right? I think my explanation was a lot easier to understand, but I could be wrong.
Shows you which way you're drawing it. So if you're ever confused.
Yeah, so you have to be careful about what viewport you use to start drawing in and what you're actually drawing. So just keep that in mind. In the line tool itself, you can specify maybe 16 inches and press enter, and you'll see that this line is 16 inches, but I haven't actually placed the other point. And so you can specify the length of your line first before you actually place how it sits in space. And again, if you want to get the orthographic on, you can click it on and then it snaps to orthographic. Or you can hold the shift key down and it does the same thing. And I guess I'm in a polyline, but we'll talk about the difference between, what's the difference between a 1 degree curve, a 2 degree curve, and a 3 degree curve. And curves are lines. Even though the word curve insinuates that it's a curve, it also can be a straight line.
All lines are curves.
Don't be a smart ass.
You guys have to take trigonometry or to get here.